All right. Good afternoon. I think we're going to get started. Yeah, we've got a great crowd already. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm going to jump into our next slide. So just a quick introductions, and then I'll introduce our guests today. My name is Brian McIntosh. I'm the Vice President of Operations with Northern BI. Really happy to have everybody who's joined us today. We've got a big crowd, great agenda, great panelists. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the overview. What we are going to cover today is we're going to have a little brief intro about Northern BI, talk a little bit about our guests, give them a chance to introduce themselves and their organizations. And then we're going to spend really the bulk of the time talking about video solutions in the telematics industry and some of the challenges that many of our customers and those on the phone are dealing with. We're going to talk about the video configurations, and we're going to talk about how to maybe overcome some of those fears and challenges we're all seeing in the industry. And then we're going to talk a little bit about privacy and what that would mean for both employees and those using the cameras. We are going to leave some time at the end to answer questions. And as I sort of cover that point, I did want to sort of talk a little bit about our other housekeeping. As I mentioned a few moments ago, all of our participants are on mute, and we're going to do that to sort of keep things moving here today. We will have our panelists come in and out of mute and in and out of camera here. We are going to be having a few polls throughout the session, so keep an eye out for those. And everybody who's on today's session will automatically be entered for a draw for one of our Yetis, and we'll do that immediately following today's session. We'll also send out a follow-up survey to everybody, and thank you for everybody who sent in their questions in advance. And so I think we've got a great bit of material to go through here today. So let me move right along. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our guests today. I'm really pleased, and I was going to say thanks, John. I was going to just ask John to turn on his video. So really excited to have this great group today. So John Ballantyne with Geotab is the Vice President of Video Strategies. John's going to take us through some of the initial part of the presentation, and I'll let John introduce Geotab here in a moment. Also very pleased to have Robin Squires from Borden Ladner Gervais BLG, and I'll have Robin introduce himself and a little bit about BLG here in a few moments. Again, and my partner in crime, Julie Darnborough, is here. She's our marketing manager. So between Julie and I, we'll try to keep the train on the tracks today. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're going to get started. I'm excited to share a new Northern BI video. It'll only take about a minute. So please sit back and enjoy.
The fleet you manage keeps our society in motion. From dispatching transport trucks and tracking snowplows to keeping our roads safe, you ensure people receive the essentials they rely on every day. But with so many moving pieces, it can leave you feeling overwhelmed. What if we told you there was a better way to manage your fleet? What if you could measure the success of your fleet in a tangible way? What if you had someone to call when you needed help? What if you could do all of this and more by working with Northern BI?
At Northern BI, we do fleet management differently. We understand our clients' challenges and deliver a personalized approach. We've been working with Geotab since 2005 and understand the solution inside and out. Achieving the value that Geotab offers requires experience, guidance, and training. This is where we come in. Our support team is the best in the industry. They'll help you maximize the return on your investment. The only question is, do you want to manage your fleet better? If so, NBI will get you there.
All right. I'm going to jump ahead. So as Dwayne introduced us, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but as Dwayne mentioned, the NBI team, we've been working with Geotab and the technology for about well over 15 years now, and we really help clients all over the US and Canada, really optimizing their use of Geotab and really achieving their goals and really helping people meet those needs. So really excited to have you here and talk to you more about video solutions. But I do want to hand it over to John to maybe speak to who Geotab is. So John, take it away.
Okay, I'll unmute myself. And yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Julie. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak to folks today about something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been involved in video telematics for more years than I care to think about. But I only joined Geotab about 3 years ago. I knew about Geotab through the reputation and was impressed with the company. I'm even more impressed as an insider with Geotab. Fantastic company to work for. It's grown like crazy. We're over 4 million vehicles connected at this point. You can see in the photo there a really neat feature if you ever visit the Geotab office. We've got a big board that is constantly updating a number of analytics in real time. And it's just something to behold. I have never been to a company that has quite that information just available for everybody to see. And it's it's warts and all. I mean, you'll even see things like downtime recorded if there is any downtime. You'll see everything on that board. It's an amazing company to work for. It's a family-owned business, so it's unlike some companies that are beholden to their investors. It's Neil Kaus and his family that own the business. They have the vision for it, and they love running it. So it's I can't say enough about Geotab. For those of you who know Geotab, you know what I'm talking about. Brian has said already that for 15 years they've been using Geotab solutions and know them inside out. So it's that's another thing to point out. We work through our reseller network. We work through value-added resellers like Northern BI, and that is a big part of Geotab's success. So this is kind of interesting. Geotab isn't known as a video telematics player. That would be a company like Lytx, for example, who I worked for at one point at Lytx. But yet we were rated by one of the research companies as the top video telematics provider this year, which was a surprise to me, in fact. But it turns out that the people at ABI Research were impressed by the fact that we have so many brands on our marketplace and that we've integrated many of them into the MyGeotab platform. And that I could talk about at length, but that's not the purpose of the seminar today, only to point out that we're as pleased as can be to be recognized by that publication. And we hope that we will continue to impress as the years go by. But it's been a long haul because Geotab didn't really start with video. It's something that's come late in Geotab's evolution.
Great. Thank you, John. Robin, did you want to spend a minute talking about BLG?
Sure. Happy to speak briefly about BLG. BLG is Canada's largest domestic law firm, meaning we don't have an international office. And we have a large trucking group or transportation group that has lawyers working in the area in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. We help trucking companies with disputes, with regulatory matters, with transactions, and just about every part of their business. And we're happy to help any company, whether it's a trucking company, a logistics company, or anybody involved in the industry, because of our experience and our knowledge in the area. and very happy to be here today to address some of the questions that we've already received about dash cams, because I suspect many people listening are concerned about the technology and what it means for the specter that we talk about in Canada so much, which is the privacy aspect of the way things are implemented. So I'll be talking about that a little bit later. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. All right, let's jump in. Julie, did you want to get us rolling here?
Yeah, so we'll just kick things off with a poll. So we just wanted to ask, what is your organization's biggest fear or barrier about implementing telematics?
Julie's going to throw, and then we'll give everybody a minute or two to answer.
Lots of answers coming in. All right, so it looks like, just give it 10 more seconds. All right, so it looks like most of our results came in at 66% of people said that driver privacy concerns were one of the biggest issues that that trucking companies are facing. So that's a big reason why we're here today presenting. 27% drivers will leave, 10% we don't understand the technology and or how it works, 19% union environment concerns. So we understand that that's a big issue for some. We don't know if we can legally implement dash cams, 13% operational costs, and a smaller percentage pushback from upper management. All right.
All right, thank you, Julie. Well, with that, let's start diving into some of these concerns and some of these issues. And so I'm going to turn it over to John, and we're talking a little bit about what video means in the industry. So, John.
Okay, so just a bit of a primer on video. We won't take too long. I think if you're here, you probably have some familiarity with the concepts. But the first is an important one. This is the difference between continuous recording and event recording. There was a time when dash cams only recorded when there was a notable event, which was typically a high acceleration. So if the accelerometer that was built in saw that a threshold had been crossed, it would begin to record, and you would get a little bit before and after that acceleration event. That's an event recorder. Nowadays, almost all of the dash cams on the market actually record continuously. They still do have events, and but events are a little bit different. They bookmark the place in the recording so you can go back to it. But technically, the camera has a few days of recording capacity, and it will just continue to write over that memory. So that you can always access the most recent few days of video while the vehicle was operational. So that's an important thing to understand in this context. And also, many systems can transmit data from the camera to a cloud server. So in some cases, now not all of the data that's recorded would go to the cloud server. It's very rare that anybody would do that because the cost would be astronomical. But these events now, which I say act as kind of bookmarks, could mark maybe a 10 or 20-second clip that could be automatically uploaded to the cloud for longer storage, more than just a few days. It could be kept there indefinitely. Video on demand is an interesting new idea that has come since continuous recording, where Suppose there was nothing to trigger an event, but you were still interested because something happened. You heard that something happened. It didn't maybe trigger an accelerometer or anything else, or that maybe the driver didn't press the manual button, but you want to go and see what happened at a certain place in time. So a lot of the systems now have the ability, so long as you get there soon enough before the recording has overwritten, you can ask for video from a certain time frame, and you go looking for it. Sometimes that can be a bit of a needle in a haystack problem to find the video you're looking for, but it is supported by a lot of the existing systems now. We already mentioned cloud storage. The point to think about there, I guess, is the length of time that you would store video in the cloud before erasing it. Cameras have both road-facing and driver-facing options. So, the traditional dash cam that's used in fleets includes both an inside view of the cabin and an outside view of the road. But there are some options where there is only an outside view of the road and there is no inside view. Some other options let you add additional cameras, maybe side views, perhaps even a rear view. We call that a multicam configuration. And then AI has made a big impact on dash cams. Most of the options now that you see, certainly on the Geotab marketplace, will include some sort of AI detection, some analytics built right into the camera. It can do what we call ADAS, Automated Driver Assistance System, or DMS, Driver Monitoring System. And there are certain things that can be sensed by the camera, things like following distance, changing lanes, advanced collision warning, maybe looking at the driver, detecting cell phone use or drowsiness or eating. And then that can be used to create in-cab alerts, which are used to kind of help the driver to realize that, hey, I better back off a little. I'm tailgating, or I better not be using my cell phone because that's not a good practice. So a lot of capabilities now with dash cams, but a lot of evolution over 15 or 20 years of this business, and it just keeps evolving. Honestly. More and more features, more and more computer power available to these devices to do more and more things. So the big question is, is the technology getting ahead of us, and what should we be using? What is fair and safe to use? And so that's really a lot of what we'll talk about today. There are some recent industry studies that I would encourage you to write down the titles and go and find them and read them if you aren't aware of these already. An excellent study from ATRI that addresses the issue we're talking about today directly. Very interesting the way they break it down. They're looking for driver view on this. They're looking for insurance companies and their view on this. And they're looking for a kind of legal point of view on this. And then they have questionnaires with some very pertinent questions that they ask these 3 different stakeholder groups, and then they compare the responses. It's really a well done study, and I would recommend you take a look at it. The second one is more focused on drivers. It's broader than just dash cams. It includes dash cams and many other things that are on drivers' minds, and that's also worth a read. So just a snippet from there, which is really telling. If you look at the table on the right of the slide, it looks like when it comes to driver acceptance, forward-facing cameras, that is road-facing cameras, there's some consensus that that can help. I'm not so worried about a road-facing cam, and maybe that's going to be useful. On the other end of the spectrum, the driver-facing cameras, not so much. Drivers are not so keen on having a camera stuck in their face. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. If you don't know what it's for, who's going to be looking at the video, then of course you're not going to want to have a camera in your face. And so this is what we must address as an industry. This is what fleets need to address. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. But one thing to say for sure is that there is, over time, evidence of a growing acceptance that cameras are here and they're going to be here in increasing numbers. That is clear. Everybody seems to understand that. They can see it happening. And so I think it's important that we do a better job of communicating what the cameras are for, how they're used, and fleets really need to take that seriously. Next slide. So here's an example of a quote that came out of the one study that I mentioned. With a driver-facing camera, you get the feeling you are being watched 100% of the time. I know that's not the case, but it's the perception. The company has to find a way to assure the driver that they are not looking to punish the driver for every little thing that they may do wrong. So very, very important, very insightful comment that we'll need to address. All right, let's keep going. Here's the rub. We know that driver distraction is a big problem. It's fascinating to look at the statistics prior to smartphones. The rate of road accidents and things like pedestrian fatalities was declining year over year. Post these devices, we're actually seeing increases in some of these statistics. It's very alarming. And there is no question that distraction because of these things is a major problem and it needs to be solved. One way to solve it is by using driver-facing cameras that can either automatically detect when a driver is distracted or manually through some kind of review process with management looking at videos on occasion and training drivers that this is not acceptable. It's against the policy to be using texting messages on a mobile device while driving. It's a huge problem and it has to be fixed. And I think personally that camera in the face is an approach to fixing that problem, or going a long way to fixing that problem. Okay, let's keep going.
All right.
And
So
at this point to Brian, I guess.
yeah, we're gonna turn this over to Julie and Robin.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, so we'll just jump right over to Robin. And the first question is it legal in Canada to install dash cams in company vehicles?
So I'm going to go a little bit outside the order of the slides. I'm using some slides in the background here to help me organize my remarks that I will share with Julie after this, so that Perfect. They can be sent out to everybody. But the real question here is, can you use a driver-facing camera and respect the principles of privacy in the workplace? And so to answer that question, you have to go back to first principles and think about what is personal information. Personal information has been defined by the law as factual or subjective information, recorded or not, about an identifiable individual. So it's any information out there that might identify you. And individuals have a right to privacy at work, even if they're using their employer's equipment. And so the tension is between the right to privacy and workplace safety, and public safety for that matter. And some of the things I'm going to talk about in my remarks are some of the decisions that have been made by courts and tribunals on this very question in Canada. And one of the things that has been said is that supervision is a part of being employed. However, there is no expectation of having one's image recorded and kept for as long as an employer chooses to keep it. the appropriating of that personal information is a significant intrusion of privacy interests. And so that's what the employees and representatives of the employees will cling to as the reason why these cameras should not be installed. That idea, though, has evolved over time. And the key point to remember from what I just read is that it's a question of expectations, right? And I'm going to talk more about that. The main piece of legislation that deals with all this in Canada is legislation called the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, which everyone refers to as PIPEDA because it's much easier to say and remember. And PIPEDA applies to all businesses in Canada unless there is provincial legislation that deals with the same subject matter. And in Ontario, there is no provincial legislation that deals with the same subject matter. And so PIPEDA applies. And generally speaking, across the country, PIPEDA also applies, generally speaking. And so transportation companies are subject to it. And anytime a transportation company is collecting personal information within Canada or about Canadian residents, the principles of PIPEDA apply, and the Privacy Commissioner could get involved if there's a complaint. In addition, a collective agreement, because some of the questions we got ahead of this presentation were about union environments. A collective agreement or a union management agreement can contain specific privacy policies and practices, and there may be negotiations that have to be done with the union about that before these things can be implemented entirely. But there is support in the case law for doing this, regardless of what the union thinks about. So let's talk about a few of the cases. And for the purposes of these remarks, I looked at 6 cases. And the first one is a case involving a camera that was not set to trigger based on a series of inputs. It was simply operating all the time. And what the court said, and this is a Quebec court decision, said that in order for it to be reasonable to have a camera facing the driver, there had to be a trigger, a reasonable trigger. For example, if there was a hard braking incident or a quick lane change incident or drowsiness that is detected or use of a cell phone that is detected. So that's important. You can't just have a camera that is recording all the time that the employer can look at whenever they like to keep an eye on the employee. There has to be a reason to look at the camera, look at the footage, in order for it to be supported by the court as reasonable. In addition, in another case, which was a labor arbitration case, the arbitrator decided that in that circumstance, there was a bit of a difference if you are dealing with transporting dangerous, hazardous products. Because of the increased public safety interest, the expectations might be increased as well, that you're going to be keeping an eye on the drivers and how they are driving and whether they're using their cell phone or falling asleep at the wheel. Those are things that the court will keep in mind. In a case involving another labor arbitration where there was transportation of concrete, so an extremely heavy load, the same kinds of comments were made. The purpose of installing the cameras was identified by the employer ahead of time as for training and skills improvement, for protection and safety of drivers and the public, for protection of the assets and the property of the company, for exoneration of the company and drivers from false claims, productivity and efficiency, and investigations into situations. And those reasons were decided by the arbitrator in that case to be bona fide reasons. In addition, you have to think about whether there's a less intrusive way to monitor driver habits. And often there isn't. But if there is a less intrusive way, like perhaps for short hauls, you could have supervisors checking on drivers every once in a while randomly. That might be a less intrusive way. But most of the time, because the cab is the workplace, the driver-facing camera is the best way and also the least intrusive way if it's set up properly to monitor the behavior. And then finally, there's a decision of the Privacy Commissioner in 2022, where the Privacy Commissioner also supported an in-cab driver-facing camera, but suggested that audio capabilities of that camera ought to be limited because you don't necessarily want to hear everything that's happening in the cab or need to hear everything that's happening in the cab. And that the access to that information is limited to those parts of the employer that need to know it. And because the company wasn't initially as transparent as it could have been with the employees about how it was going to use that technology, what it was for, the Privacy Commissioner said that there were additional steps that should have been taken. And so the themes are, is there a reasonable expectation of privacy? Is there a genuine concern for safety or security? Is there a direct connection between the installation of those cameras and safety and security? Is it reasonable to have that surveillance in place? And are there less intrusive alternatives available? And so when you get to thinking about if and how you're going to do this in your business, you have to think about some best practices. PIPEDA, the Privacy Act for Canada, says you have to have consent. And every piece of privacy legislation in the world that I'm aware of says the same thing. You have to have informed consent before you can collect private information. Now, that informed consent can be mandated through your employee agreement, through your driver use policy, and through sign off on the drivers having read and understood those things. That is valid consent if it's a bona fide work requirement. You have to think about collecting only the information that you need to fulfill the purpose. You have to think about how long you're going to store that information, because there's a limit to how long the expectation of privacy might be limited for an employee. You have to have procedures in place for retaining and destroying that information after a certain amount of time. And drivers have the right to see the footage as well. You can't just keep it to yourself and not allow the driver to access their own personal information about the way that they're driving, and to be able to challenge the accuracy and completeness of that information from time to time. All of that should be included in a privacy policy, an employment contract, a collective agreement or a union management agreement, and there should be an acknowledgement obtained from drivers if they've read and understood it. And that is it from me, Julie.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Robin. So you did cover quite a bit of information there. And just to go back, so we did kind of confirm that, yes, it is legal to implement dash cams in company vehicles, provided that you're communicating that information, you're being transparent with your employees and drivers, that you have viable reasoning to do so, that there's not another, less invasive way to be, monitoring safety and what have you, and understanding that who has access to it and that the driver can access it themselves if need be.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It has to be thoughtful. You can't just do it without giving thought to some of those things. And what I would recommend to everybody who's thinking about it is to make sure that not only is there an operational decision-making matrix followed for what makes sense to do and how to do it, but also that you involve your legal counsel in what you're doing so that you have a good sense of whether it complies with what the privacy commissioner and the arbitrators and courts have said.
Okay, very good. All right, and I know that we did mention somebody did have a question in the registration about union environments, and you touched on that, just about taking that a little bit of a step further to ensure that any kind of Dashcam agreement is documented within the union agreements.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's going to become an issue for the union, and so it has to be a part of negotiation and discussion with the union in order for it to be done without too much disruption. But the union should want the same things as the employer, which is for the driver, the public, and the company to all be able to receive the protection that they're due.
Absolutely. All right, great. Thanks, Robin. Okay, we'll just jump ahead, Brian. And if people want to find more information on PIPEDA, for instance, that you mentioned, or find an employee agreement template that they could build off of, should they wish to implement Dashcams, is there a place where people can go?
The best resource that I'm aware of for privacy, for understanding what PIPEDA says, first of all, and how to implement it in your business, for anything that you're doing, is the Privacy Commissioner's website. The Privacy Commissioner for Canada has a website. It has all kinds of great resources on it. I can't remember off the top of my head if it has an example agreement with an employee, but certainly those things are available simply through Google. You could find those kinds of agreements and modify them. However, I caution you not to just take someone else's agreement and make it your own by putting your name on it. Make sure your legal counsel reviews it and ensures that it is appropriate for the circumstance, because every circumstance will be different.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thanks very much. All right, Brian, you want to step ahead? And we're just going to take this back to John from Geotab for a moment to review some of the privacy principles when it comes to the Dashcams themselves.
Okay, thanks, Julie. It was really interesting to hear Robin mention that different use cases could result in different expectations as well, and that's kind of a key thing. There is maybe not going to be a one size fits all. He mentioned particularly hazardous transportation and how the best practices may in fact require that cameras be used. I certainly know that in some experience that I had in Australia, that was the case, that the companies that were transporting, for example, fuel, they wanted to make sure that the vehicles were equipped with cameras, and including driver-facing cameras. They wanted to be able to reconstruct anything that that might be considered dangerous and to deal with it. That was their best practices, and you can kind of understand the risks associated with fuel transport and why that might be important. But what I wanted to say is that at Geotab, we've been wrestling with this now for a few years. We have people who are full-time looking at the privacy aspect of using video, and we've put some internal policies into place. And there are a few principles that I wanted to mention that we've been working on and encouraging our solutions providers to work on with us. We have a concept of privacy by design, which is that those things that that may be considered to be intrusive can be isolated and, if need be, turned off. And in fact, that they would be off by default, right? So for example, audio we mentioned. You would not expect the camera to be installed with the audio just automatically working. If there is audio capability at all, that would need to be turned on by the management. And so, for example, another idea is a privacy mode, where under different circumstances, the camera can be put into a mode where it is not recording. And that might be based on some kind of automated input like location. If the vehicle is within a certain distance of the driver's home, for example, it could be turned off because you know where the vehicle is through other technology that it's equipped with. And so within a certain zone, that camera would not be active. Or maybe by the time of day is another way to think about using that feature. So these are just a few of the ideas that we are floating to our to our partners to build into the design, so that we have the ability to pick and choose which functions are appropriate for a given use case. We spend a lot of time also thinking about the mechanics of consent. How do we provide the right information to be sure that the person or the organization that's offering the consent understands exactly what's being done with the information. So we have a consent framework that we've developed that we're working with our resellers to figure out how to implement all the way through to the end user. And the other big aspect that we need to think about from a technical perspective is the security and the control of the data. That goes down to things like who can access it. Do we have the ability to audit who has accessed data? Where does the data reside? In which country? How long is the data retained for? So these are the things that we think long and hard about and are building systems around, so that we can be ready as the focus is more and more on privacy and the security of the data. So there are a few best practices that we can talk about today that are common. The use of some options for the inside camera. I mean, a lens cover. Some cameras are equipped with a cover. If the driver is uncomfortable, they close the cover. We have that on our computers. Maybe drivers ought to be able to have that on their dash cams as well. It's not always appropriate, but it might be an option that a company could consider. The other thought that has been floated around, I'm not sure how legitimate it is, but that it's not really a camera. It doesn't record and nobody ever sees the imagery. It's used as a sensor. So for example, that sensor could tell a driver that they are drowsy and warn them to, have a cup of coffee or do something to counter that drowsiness. Then it's a drowsiness sensor, not a camera. Nobody's looking at the imagery, but it could be a really useful thing for a driver to have something that is kind of looking out for them in their best interests, of course, because nobody wants to be falling asleep at the wheel. So a camera as a sensor is a concept. And then it becomes maybe a little less problematic if that's how it's explained, what the reasoning is to have it in place. So we already mentioned privacy mode. I think an important thing to explain is the benefits. Now, here's the thing we know. Driver coaching, when it's done properly, works. It dramatically improves the safety of the fleet. When a driver coaching program with video to support it is implemented, it absolutely works. There's a lot of history that shows that. Many large fleets will attest to it, and it's important to have engagement with the drivers. You talked about driver retention, or somebody asked questions about driver retention. Will cameras cause drivers to leave? On the contrary, if you use them right, the driver will understand that the company is concerned for their safety and trying to do their best to make sure that they are safe. And when it's presented in that context, and you have a coaching program that involves the use of cameras, that can actually help to retain drivers as opposed to push them away. Then, of course, sometimes it's important to be able to exonerate a driver. So often drivers are accused of having been at fault for something when it's not their fault at all. And the camera never lies, right? So they can actually help drivers in those circumstances. So there are a lot of things that that we can talk about that will help a company to implement a program, a safety program with cameras, and to get drivers on board. And once they understand how it's used and that it is effective, that will certainly change the rate of acceptance.
All right, thanks, John. And then we have time for one last poll. So let me just get this here. All right. So knowing what you know now, do you feel more comfortable implementing dash cams into your fleet? And I'll just launch this last poll. Lots of answers flooding in. Just give it another few seconds. All right, so we'll just end it now. And all right, so we have 120 participants in the poll. We had 29% saying absolutely. We're 43% at somewhat. So that's better than not at all, which is a small 6%. Some people, 14%, would still like to learn more, still need a little bit more information. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so now we'll have some time for our open Q&A. So thanks everybody for putting your questions into the Q&A section. It just keeps it better organized and we can answer them. All right, so Brian is going to read out some of the questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you again, Julie, and thank you, John and Robin. I've been answering a few questions as we move along here. I do have a few that I sort of saved because I thought they were great questions that could be best addressed by our panelists. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Question was, is Geotab device agnostic? I mean, is it possible to use cheap Chinese ADAS DMS dash cams?
No, we're not device agnostic in that sense. We actually have at least 20 partners that have video solutions that we work with on our marketplace. We have two who are what we call natively integrated. So right in the My Geotab platform, you can configure your cameras and see your camera data, and it is we're able to take that camera data and combine it with the other telematics data. We're not, we wouldn't just say that we are compatible with any and every camera, not at all. We have an APK. Our partners use that to various degrees to do integrations with Geotab, but we would be limited to those that have done that. So it doesn't mean we would turn away a so-called cheap dash cam if it kind of met the criteria. And we do vet our solutions, and so we're new ones are coming along all the time, and they are finding their place within marketplace. But no, check the marketplace out, see what solutions are there. There are all solutions at various price points.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So a lot of the questions obviously were related to some of the points that Robin covered, and a couple of interesting ones that came in that we didn't necessarily get to specifically. So Robin, a couple of ones for you. Are there any legalities for municipalities? Oh, sorry, my screen just scrolled down on recording members of the public if they're in a public space?
So currently Currently in Canada, I think the answer to that question is no. There's no expectation of privacy if you're in a public space. However, privacy laws around the world are changing. Canada is currently in the process of changing its own privacy laws. And in Europe, for example, you would have an expectation of privacy in a public space. And so the law may change in that way in Canada soon. Stay tuned. But I also understand from what John has said that there may be technology that is starting to be built into some of these solutions that allows you to de-identify the public that get captured in your front-facing cameras or your side or back-facing cameras, so that you don't have that concern anymore.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. Similar kind of line of questioning. Can data or camera footage be shared with local law enforcement and or insurance companies, such as claims?
So that's a very, I'll call it a loaded question. It depends whether I'm the plaintiff or the defendant. How's that? But the real answer is that if you have information that, including camera footage, and you're involved in a litigation or a criminal case, you may be forced to turn that information over. You may want to do it voluntarily, depending on the situation, depending on what the insurance company's suggesting that you do. I don't think there's anything in law that says that you have to until you get involved in a criminal proceeding or a civil proceeding about a particular case, or your insurance policy says that you have to.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question, and maybe I'll start with this one, John, and you can speak to this maybe for some of the partners, some of the other marketplace partners that I'm not as familiar with. So the question was, how long can the camera record when parked? Would it stay on long enough to record tool or converter theft? And I can certainly speak to the solutions that I'm aware of. One of our partners that we work with, we can set what we call the parking mode, or continuing to record after the vehicle has been parked for up to, I think it's 24 hours. Most of our clients don't have the setting that long. They usually have it set for between 1 and 2 hours, because really it's all about how much footage do you want to record. But John, I'm just curious if you know the answer to that for some of the other partners.
Yeah, many of the cameras make that a variable that can be set. The issue, though, isn't so much how long can I make it. It's as a setting, it's whether the vehicle would risk the battery drainage in the time that. So depending on the system and how much power it's drawing from the vehicle and the state of the vehicle batteries and the capacity of the vehicle batteries, you may not want 24 hours, because when you get back to that truck, it's not going to start. So the reason they have the reason they do kind of turn off or go to sleep when the vehicle is stopped is to avoid the battery drainage problem. So that really is a case by case. It depends on the vehicle and it depends on the cameras, but most of them do make that a variable that can be set.
Awesome. I know Julie just answered the one question I was going to actually check with you as well, and John. So one of the question was, do these camera systems support side cameras or auxiliary cameras? And I do know that at least one of the partners we work with regularly do support auxiliary cameras, so you can have additional cameras on the side or even on the back of your vehicle. But can you speak to that maybe for some of the other marketplace partners?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Traditionally there were two form factors. There was the Dashcam and there was the mobile digital video recorder, the so-called MDVR. The MDVR was meant for multi-camera solutions. The Dashcam was really just the in and out camera. But there's been an interesting evolution that we've seen several partners move towards, which is additional inputs to the Dashcam. So there's no MDVR box to mount anywhere. You just bring extra cables back to the camera that's in the windshield, and you can record additional channels. And they call those auxiliary cameras, and they are even wireless auxiliary cameras, so that you don't have to actually literally wire them back to the up through the headliner and to the windshield, but it's a wireless connection. That's becoming more common. I won't say that they all have it, but some of the notable brands do have auxiliary cameras available for the Dashcam.
Absolutely. All right, I want to be very mindful of our time. We're coming up to the top of the hour, so I'm gonna just move on to our next slide. So thank you all for joining us today. So we did have a lot of questions. We didn't necessarily get to every single question, but anybody who did put a question in our Q&A section, we will work to get answers, and we will be providing those answers when we send out our follow-up information. So again, just a quick summary of a few things. First of all, thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to John and Robin for joining us today and providing a lot of great content, a lot for us to think about. Just a few sort of things that we mentioned earlier. We will be sending out a survey here a little bit later to all the participants. Anybody who is registered and was on today's session will get a link to the recording, so that'll be available a little bit later. As I also mentioned, we'll also be collecting and all of the questions and the answers that we recorded. And even if we didn't get to the question, we'll be getting those answers, and we'll put those out with our follow-up items. Everybody who was in today's session will be entered for a draw to win one of our really nice Yetis that you see displayed here on the screen. So you should see the winners will be notified fairly soon. We also will be planning on new events in 2024. So please stay tuned to your calendar and your email for the next invite from Northern Business Intelligence. So again, with that, I want to close right on time. So again, thank you, Robin. Thank you, John. Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will see everybody on the next event. Thanks very much. Chat with you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.